Chapter 3, April 15th, 1912, 12:30 a.m. Ruth! Ruth! Wake up! Where am I? Ruth wondered. She rubbed her eyes. Then she remembered. She was on board the Titanic. But why did her mother sound so frightened? Get out of bed and put coats on the children, her mother continued. The ship has hit an iceberg. We're supposed to go up to the deck. Now Ruth was wide awake. She got out of bed and quickly dressed Marion and Richard. The Beckers left their cabin. In their hurry, they forgot their life belts. The family joined a group of passengers waiting to be led up to the boat deck. Some of them were fully dressed. Others, like Ruth and her mother, had coats over their nightclothes. It sounded just like the ship ran into gravel, one woman said. Everyone wanted to know more about what had happened. Had the iceberg made a big hole? How serious was the damage? Was water flowing into the ship? A crewman arrived and took the passengers to the lifeboats. Women and children first, people shouted. Someone lifted Marion and Richard into lifeboat number 11. That's all for this boat, an officer said. Oh, please let me go with my children, Mrs. Becker cried. A seaman helped her into the lifeboat, but Ruth was left behind. Ruth, her mother screamed, get in another boat. Ruth walked over to the next boat. May I get in? She asked an officer. He lifted her into lifeboat number 13. It was so crowded that Ruth had to stand up. Lower away, the officer shouted. The boat dropped jerkily toward the sea. Ruth looked up at hundreds of passengers still on board the Titanic. There were not enough lifeboats for all of them. Ruth's boat reached the water safely, but no one knew what to do or where to go. The passengers on board asked one of the crew to be their captain. Row toward those lights in the distance, he ordered. They might be the lights of a ship that could pick us up. Ruth looked back at the Titanic. Rockets went up from the ship, sending bursts of stars into the sky. They were distress signals calling any nearby ships to come and help. The bow of the Titanic was sinking. Ruth looked at the people still on board. They were trying to move back toward the stern. The ship's lights went out. Suddenly there was a loud noise like thunder. The Titanic broke apart. Ruth watched people leap into the sea. The bow disappeared under the water. For a minute the stern stood straight up in the ocean. It looked like a huge whale. Then the Titanic dove beneath the waves. 1912, 3 o'clock a.m. The sea will be covered with ships tomorrow, said a crewman in Ruth's boat. They will race from all over to find us. The lifeboats from the Titanic drifted on the calm, cold ocean. The survivors tried to keep the boats together by calling out to one another in the dark. Ruth heard a rocket. In the distance, she spotted a faint green light. Could it be a rescue ship? Everyone in the boat who had a scrap of paper lit a match to it. They held these torches up high in the air. Maybe someone would see them. The passengers at the oars rowed toward the lights. As they drew closer, they could see that the lights came from a large ship. The ocean became rough. Ruth was drenched by the cold, splashing water. Finally, the lifeboat pulled alongside the rescue ship. Crewmen on board lowered a swing down to the boat. Ruth's hands were too numb to grasp the ropes. Someone had to tie her into the swing. The crew pulled her up the side of the ship. Its solid deck felt good beneath her feet. Ruth went up to the ship's open deck. Most of the lifeboats had come in, but there was no sign of her family. Then Ruth felt a tap on her shoulder. Are you Ruth Becker? A woman said. Your mother has been looking for you. She led Ruth to the second-class dining room. Mrs. Becker, Marion, and Richard threw their arms around her. Ruth's eyes filled with tears of relief. Some of the Titanic's passengers prepared to board the rescue ship from their lifeboat. The crew of the rescue ship, the Carpathia, searched the sea for several hours, but no more survivors were found. Several days later, the Carpathia arrived in New York City harbor. Thousands of people waited in pouring rain to greet the survivors. Ruth heard cries of joy from the people who had found their loved ones, but many others looked sad as they searched for family and friends who had drowned.